Annabel was born in a small Nigerian town. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, were hard-working people. Her father was a banker, and her mother owned a fabric shop in the market. They wanted the best for Annabel, so they made sure she went to a good school. Annabel loved school. She was one of the smartest kids in her class. Every day, she read her books, did her assignments on time, and always wanted to make her parents proud. She had a best friend named Sandra, and they always talked about their dreams. "I want to be a doctor," Sandra would say. "I want to own a big company," Annabel would reply. Her parents were proud of her, but they were always busy. They barely had time to help with homework or attend her school events. Her mother would say, "Annabel, we work hard so you can have a better future." She understood, but sometimes she wished they were around more. As Annabel grew older, her dreams only got bigger. She worked hard in school and got into a top university. Life in school was exciting, but also challenging. She had to manage her studies, make new friends, and sometimes deal with the loneliness of being away from home. She met a young man named Daniel. He was charming, smart, and funny. At first, they were just friends, but over time, they fell in love. After university, Annabel got a good job in a big company. She was determined to be successful. She and Daniel got married, and soon, they had a son named Jason. Annabel loved Jason with all her heart, but she also wanted to build a career. Annabel and Daniel both had demanding jobs. Annabel traveled a lot for work, attending meetings and business trips. Daniel was also busy, always working late. They barely had time for themselves, let alone for Jason. To take care of Jason, they hired a maid named Sarah. She was a young woman from a nearby village. She was quiet and hardworking. Annabel trusted her to look after Jason while she and Daniel were away. At first, everything seemed fine. Sarah cooked for Jason, helped him with his homework, and put him to bed. Annabel felt relieved knowing her son was in good hands. But something started changing. Jason, who was once a happy and playful boy, became quiet. He didn't smile as much. He stopped talking about his day. When Annabel or Daniel asked him what was wrong, he would just shake his head and say, "Nothing." Annabel thought he was just adjusting to their busy schedules. "Maybe he just misses us," she told Daniel. "We should spend more time with him." But they never had the time. One evening, Annabel came home early from work. She expected to see Jason playing or watching cartoons. Instead, she heard muffled sounds from his room. Annabel pushed the door open and saw Jason curled up on his bed, hugging his knees. His face was wet with tears, and he flinched when he saw her. "Jason, what's wrong?" Annabel rushed to him, touching his forehead. He was trembling. At first, Jason didn't speak. He just shook his head and wiped his face quickly, as if trying to hide his tears. "Talk to me, baby," Annabel said softly, her heart pounding. Jason looked at her for a moment, his small lips quivering. Then he whispered, "I don't like Sarah." Her throat went dry. Jason had always been a happy child, full of energy. But now, looking at him closely, she noticed something. His once bright eyes were dull, his lips were chapped, and his skin looked paler than usual. She gently pulled him back. "Baby, tell mommy everything." Jason hesitated. He bit his lower lip, his small fingers gripping the fabric of her gown. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Sarah, she does bad things to me." Annabel's heart pounded. "What kind of bad things?" Jason looked down, refusing to meet her eyes. "She makes me do things. Things I don't like." Annabel's breath caught in her throat. "What things, Jason?" Jason hesitated, tears forming in his eyes. Then, in a small voice, he said, "She touches me. In places." The room spun. Annabel felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her. "No, no, Jason," she whispered, her hands shaking. Jason wiped his tears quickly, as if he had done something wrong by telling her. "She said if I told you, you'd send me away. She said I was a bad boy." Annabel's body stiffened. A sharp, cold rage crawled up her spine. Her son, her baby, had been suffering in silence. Jason swallowed hard, his little voice cracking. She told me if I cried, she would lock me in the dark room. Annabel's eyes widened. What dark room? Jason pointed toward the small storage room at the end of the hallway. Annabel's stomach turned. That room had no windows, just a dusty, abandoned space for old furniture and unused clothes. She locked you in there? Jason nodded, his tiny hands clenched into fists. She said if I cried too much, the shadows would take me. Annabel felt something inside her snap. Her vision blurred with hot tears, but underneath, rage burned like fire. She stood up abruptly. Her hands balled into fists. Where was Sarah? Annabel stormed out of Jason's room, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She found Sarah in the kitchen, casually washing plates as if she had done nothing wrong. Annabel's voice came out cold. Too cold. Sarah. The maid turned, surprised to see Annabel standing there with fire in her eyes. Madam, you're back early. Annabel didn't let her finish. In 2 quick steps, she grabbed Sarah by the arm and slammed her against the wall. Plates clattered in the sink. Sarah gasped. Madam, what have you been doing to my son? Annabel's voice was sharp, filled with a deadly calm. Sarah's eyes flickered with something. Fear? Guilt. But she quickly masked it with a fake smile. Madam, I don't understand. Annabel slammed her against the wall again. Harder. This time, Sarah flinched. Don't you dare lie to me. Annabel's voice was shaking. You locked my son in a dark room? You touched him. You made him afraid to speak. Sarah opened her mouth, then shut it. Annabel grabbed her face, forcing her to look at her. I trusted you with my son, you monster. You hurt my baby while I was out working to feed you. Sarah smirked, but Annabel saw the sweat on her forehead. You were never here. You left him with me. Annabel's stomach churned. Sarah leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. You think you're a good mother? You weren't there, madam. I raised him more than you did. Annabel snapped. She didn't think. She just acted. Her fist connected with Sarah's face so hard that the maid stumbled backward, knocking a plate off the counter. Sarah screamed. Madam, are you mad? You're lucky I don't kill you with my bare hands. Annabel's voice was low, deadly. She grabbed Sarah by the hair and dragged her toward the door. Pack your things. You're leaving this house now. Sarah's smirk was gone. You'll regret this, she hissed. Annabel shoved her. Not as much as you will. And with that, she slammed the door shut behind her. But Annabel knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Sarah had hurt her son. And she was going to pay. Annabel stood by the door, her chest rising and falling heavily. The house was silent except for the sound of her own breathing. Sarah was gone. She turned and rushed back to Jason's room. He was still sitting on the bed, his knees pulled up to his chest. His eyes were wide with fear, as if he wasn't sure if things were truly over. Annabel knelt in front of him and cupped his face. Baby, she's gone. No one will ever hurt you again. Jason blinked, his lips trembling. Are you sure? Annabel hugged him tightly. I promise. He clung to her, and for the first time in months, Annabel felt like she was holding her son again. But she knew this wasn't the end. The damage had already been done. Later that night, Annabel sat on the couch, waiting. Her hands were shaking, and her mind was racing. She had called Daniel earlier, telling him to come home immediately. When he finally walked through the door, looking exhausted from work, he frowned. Annabel, what's wrong? She took a deep breath. Daniel, sit down. We need to talk. Daniel hesitated, sensing the tension in her voice. Is Jason okay? Annabel clenched her fists. No. Daniel. He's not okay. She didn't sugarcoat it. She told him everything. How Sarah had been locking Jason in the darkroom, how she had been hurting him, how she had touched him in ways that made him afraid to speak. Daniel's face went pale. What? Annabel's voice cracked. She made him suffer, Daniel. And we were too busy to see it. Daniel stood up suddenly, his hands on his head. No, this can't be true. Jason told me himself. Annabel's voice was cold, and I saw it in his eyes. He was terrified of her. Daniel was breathing heavily now, his hands shaking. Where is she? I threw her out. That's not enough. Daniel's jaw tightened. We need to report her. She can't do this to another child. Annabel nodded. We will. But first, we need to help Jason heal. The days that followed were not easy. Jason refused to sleep alone. He had nightmares. Terrible ones. He would wake up screaming, crying for his mother. Sometimes, he would wake up and hide under the bed, whispering, "Please don't lock me in again." Annabel's heart broke every time. One night, as she tucked him into bed, he finally spoke. "Mommy," he whispered. "Yes, baby." His little fingers clutched the bedsheet. "Do you still love me?" Annabel's chest tightened. "Oh, my love, why would you ask me that?" Jason's lips quivered. Sarah said, "She said you didn't want me. That's why you were always gone." Annabel's vision blurred with tears. She climbed into bed beside him, hugging him tight. "Don't ever believe that. I love you more than anything in this world." Jason buried his face in her chest and sobbed. Annabel held him, rocking him gently. She had almost lost him. But she would never make that mistake again. Annabel and Daniel didn't stop at throwing Sarah out. They went to the police. At first, the officers hesitated. "Do you have proof?" one of them asked. Annabel slammed her hands on the table. "Proof. My son is proof." Daniel's voice was low and dangerous. "Find her before I do." The officers took them seriously after that. They launched an investigation, questioning neighbors and other families Sarah had worked for in the past. And then the truth unraveled. Sarah had worked in 3 other homes before theirs. And in every single one, a child had suffered. She had done this before. But no one had spoken up. No one had stopped her. Until now. Days later, the police found Sarah hiding in another town. When Annabel got the call, her hands trembled. "She's been arrested," the officer said. "She's denying everything, but we have enough testimonies." Annabel exhaled slowly. Justice. When she hung up, she turned to Jason, who was playing quietly with his toys. She smiled at him. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled back. Annabel thought the worst was behind them. But she was wrong. One night, while watching Jason sleep, she felt it, a shadow lurking outside the window. And when she checked the front door the next morning, there was a note. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were the words, "This isn't over. You will regret what you've done." Annabel's blood ran cold. Sarah was locked up. So who left the note? Annabel's fingers trembled as she held the note. The handwriting was rough, almost shaky, as if written in a hurry. "This isn't over. You will regret what you've done." Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. Daniel, who had just walked into the living room, frowned. "Annabel, what's wrong?" Wordlessly, she handed him the note. Daniel's face darkened as he read it. He clenched his jaw. "Who left this?" Annabel shook her head. "I don't know. But Sarah is in jail." They both turned to look at the front door. It had been locked all night. There were no signs of a break-in. Whoever left the note had come and gone quietly. Daniel's hands curled into fists. "We need to take this seriously." Annabel looked toward Jason's bedroom. He was still asleep, curled up under his blanket. She couldn't let anything happen to him. "We should tell the police," she whispered. Daniel exhaled sharply. "We will. But first, I'm getting security cameras installed." If someone comes near this house again, I want to see their face. Annabel nodded. But deep inside, she knew whoever did this wasn't done. That night, Annabel barely slept. She kept checking Jason's room, making sure he was safe. Every creak, every shadow outside the window made her heart race. At 2 a.m., she finally lay down beside Daniel, staring at the ceiling. Just as she was about to drift off, thump. Annabel's eyes snapped open. Another thump. This time, from outside the house. She sat up, listening. The sound was coming from the backyard. Slowly, she nudged Daniel. Wake up. There's someone outside. Daniel was up in seconds. He grabbed a torchlight and crept toward the window. He peeked out, his body tense. After a few seconds, he muttered, "There's no one there." Annabel's stomach clenched. But she knew what she heard. The next morning, Daniel installed the security cameras. 2 in the front yard, 2 in the back, and 1 near Jason's bedroom window. By evening, Annabel finally felt a little safer. But her peace didn't last long. The police called. "Mrs. Johnson," the officer said, "we've been investigating Sarah's past. We believe she wasn't working alone." Annabel's fingers tightened around her phone. "What do you mean?" "There were people she was connected to. Other maids, house staff, people who moved from home to home. Some were involved in things worse than child abuse." Annabel's blood ran cold. "You mean trafficking?" There was a pause. "We're looking into it. But we need you to be careful. We believe someone close to her might be watching your family." Annabel nearly dropped the phone. Daniel, who had been listening, grabbed it from her. "Who are these people? Do you have names?" The officer hesitated. "We're still gathering information. But we'll have officers patrolling near your home." Annabel suddenly felt like she couldn't breathe. Jason wasn't just a victim. He was a target. And Sarah wasn't the only threat. Later that night, Annabel sat with Jason in the living room, watching cartoons. She didn't want him out of her sight. Then, Jason suddenly spoke. "Mommy, can I ask something?" Annabel turned to him. "Of course, baby." Jason hesitated, then whispered, "Is Sarah coming back?" Annabel felt her stomach tighten. "No, sweetheart. She's gone." Jason nodded slowly, his little fingers fidgeting. "But she had a friend. He used to come to the house when you were not around." Annabel's entire body stiffened. "A friend." She struggled to keep her voice calm. "Jason, can you tell me about this friend?" Jason's small face wrinkled in thought. He was a man. He used to give Sarah small packages. She would hide them in the kitchen. Annabel's heart started pounding. "Did he ever talk to you?" Jason nodded slowly. "One time, he asked me if I wanted to go on a trip. He said it would be fun, and I would get lots of toys. But when I said no, Sarah got angry." Annabel felt like throwing up. They were planning to take him. She grabbed her phone and dialed the police. The police came within the hour. They checked the security cameras and found something terrifying. The night before, while Annabel and Daniel were sleeping, a man had walked around their house. He had stood outside Jason's window for minutes, just watching. And then, he had left the note. Annabel couldn't breathe. The officer turned to them. "This is not random. Someone wants your son." Daniel clenched his fists. "We need to catch him." And so they set a trap. That night, they pretended to go to sleep. But outside, plainclothes police officers hid near the house, watching, waiting. At exactly 1:45 a.m., the backyard camera caught movement. A shadowy figure appeared near Jason's window. He bent down, reaching for something near the ground. And then, the officers jumped out. "Don't move." The man tried to run, but they tackled him to the ground. He thrashed, but within seconds, he was handcuffed. Annabel and Daniel ran outside. The police pulled the man's hoodie back. Annabel's blood turned to ice. It was one of Sarah's old boyfriends. The man was arrested. And with him, the police uncovered a hidden trafficking ring. Sarah had been part of something bigger. She had been working with others, grooming children, preparing them to be taken. And Jason had been next. Annabel couldn't stop shaking. She hugged Jason close, vowing never to let anything like this happen again. Daniel held both of them tightly. He's safe now. But Annabel knew the scars would take time to heal. As the police car drove the man away, he turned back and smirked. Annabel's stomach churned. And then, with a low voice, he muttered, "We'll be back." The words echoed in her mind long after the police car disappeared down the road. Daniel held her trembling hands. "Don't listen to him. They've been caught. It's over." But deep inside, Annabel knew better. Evil doesn't just disappear. That night, she barely slept. Every sound made her heart race. Every shadow outside the window made her stomach tighten. Jason had been through so much. Too much. She wouldn't let fear control them. She had to end this. The next morning, Annabel and Daniel went straight to the police station. "This isn't enough," Annabel said firmly. "You need to catch every single one of them." The officers assured them that Sarah and the man they arrested were already talking. More names were coming out. But Annabel wasn't satisfied. She contacted a child protection agency and shared Jason's story. She went on radio stations. She spoke to mothers in the community. And soon, other families came forward. It turned out that Sarah and her group had been operating for years. They had hurt many children. But no one had spoken up before. Annabel made sure this time they wouldn't escape. Within weeks, 10 more arrests were made. The trafficking ring was completely destroyed. Even though the danger was gone, Jason still had nightmares. Some nights, he woke up screaming, clutching his bedsheets. Annabel and Daniel took him to therapy. They made sure he knew he was safe. And slowly, Jason began to heal. One evening, as Annabel tucked him into bed, he whispered, "Mommy, I feel safe again." Annabel's heart swelled with emotion. She kissed his forehead and whispered back, "You will always be safe, baby." The experience changed Annabel forever. She realized how dangerous it was to trust just anyone with your child. She quit her corporate job and started an organization to help families protect their children. She educated mothers about choosing the right caregivers. She worked with the police to bring child abusers to justice. And she made sure no other child suffered like Jason did. Months later, Annabel sat on the porch, watching Jason play in the yard. He was laughing again. Happy. Daniel came outside and sat next to her. "You did it," he said. Annabel smiled. "We did it." Jason ran up to them and hugged Annabel tightly. "I love you, Mommy," he said. Annabel hugged him back, holding him close. She had almost lost him. But now, she would never take another moment for granted. Because at the end of the day, no success is greater than the safety of your child. This story teaches us that no success is more important than the safety and well-being of your child. Many parents work hard to provide for their families. But in doing so, they sometimes trust the wrong people to care for their children. This story is a wake-up call. Always be aware of who you allow into your home. Not everyone who smiles at your child has good intentions. Parents, be careful who you trust with your children. What did you learn from this story? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Let's discuss how we can protect our children from harm. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe so you don't miss the next eye-opening story. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and always put family first.